Hello, this is Dr. Joel B. Goodin, talking about the Chapter 1 statement of the problem. Um, so here we have the DPDM criteria, depending on what university you're studying with. It may be called something different, but it should be generally something similar to these criteria that are required here. Um, so here it says the problem to be addressed by this study is, and then insert some information here, right? Insert problem here, right? So this statement should logically flow from the introduction and clearly identify the problem to be addressed by the study. So three things to note here are the wording of the problem sentence, how it should logically flow from the introduction, and that it should clearly identify the problem to be addressed by the study. Depending on the traditions of your university and where you're going, it may say something like the problem is, the problem to be addressed is. I generally suggest, at least at North Central University, the problem to be addressed by the proposed study is. Um, and then insert that. So it will be one clear and concise sentence identifying something that is wrong or missing. And I cannot tell you with enough emphasis how often it happens that somebody will tell me what they're going to do about the problem rather than what the problem is. And so let me explain that. They will often tell me their purpose, the purpose of their study. The problem is to explore perceptions of racism in the United States or something like that. That's a hypothetical purpose of a study. That is not the problem that is driving the purpose. The purpose is the response to the problem. Think about it as if it's a fire. You're essentially saying the problem is I need to put the fire out. Okay, I understand what you mean, but putting the fire out is not necessarily the problem. The problem is the fire. It is that which is burning your important documents or things you own. So what is it that is the fire, and not what is it that you're going to do about the fire? And you need to identify that. Now this is sort of a process, identifying that which is wrong or missing. We typically want to avoid saying there's just not enough research on something. That is sort of it works in many cases, and you'll have to ask your chair what to do in that situation. But generally, you can say it better than that. That there's a lack of efficacy behind doing it this way instead of there's a lack of research. Or that people are doing it this way without sort of justification. Or there is a lack of attention, as noted by scholars, um, about this issue. And that's the fire, that lack of attention to something that is important. How do you know it's a fire? Well, it's something that is wrong or missing, but it's not just something that you pick. At the doctoral level, as a doctoral student, you are sort of limited. And you're limited for several reasons. Maybe because you don't have the experience that you will have after this process. But the other thing is that you are limited because we want you to do everything sort of by the book at this level. Later on, when you have tenure at some university and you've been there and you're wearing pajamas to teach classes, whatever it is you do, um, and you're you can sort of do research sort of the quote wrong ways, or sort of with some flexibility, or cutting some corners. And what I mean by that is you can study whatever you want. You can say, well, today I got cut off, or I was driving to work and then I decided when I got to work I want to study why people drive slowly in the left lane of traffic. Okay, well, that could be a problem. It could even be a research problem, but what we're looking at for you, the dissertating student, is that you have proof, justification beyond what you think is an issue, beyond what you think. It must be you and who else. And the who else needs to include about 15 other scholarly current articles. Okay. So you're going to get your wording down. This may need to wait, because what you're really going to do first is you're going to examine the evidence in your field. A lot of programs do or should have you do the literature review on your topic first. That way you can see what is current, what the current scholars in the last, say, 4 or 5 years say is missing. Say, well, we did this study on curing cancer, but the next thing we need to figure out is whether it cures cancer for all races equitably, in the same manner, or if it is disproportionate in some ways, or something like that. In other words, what is that next step? So the problem is there's a fire, and maybe a previous research study has proven there is a fire, but in that study they pointed out something metaphorically similar to, but we still don't understand what the blue flames are as opposed to the orange or red flames or yellow flames. And so what is it that has been studied in your problem area? And just think about the topic that you've just presented in your introduction. What is it in your problem area that is the problem that has not yet been studied? And so what you'll want to do is probably pull up something like this and start saying, something like, the article that you're reading, and then potential problems. And you might look into this article and normally go to the discussion section. Go to the discussion section and see, okay, what did they find? And then what did they say is in need for future research? So generally they'll talk about their limitations. Limitations of our study, or that we were not able to yet study X, Y, or Z, or that we were really, the next thing to do after our study, even if it wasn't a limitation, the next step should be this other thing. So we've decided that you should wear a mask for coronavirus, perhaps, and then next we need to figure out whether wearing a spacesuit works. And I'm making that up, obviously, but what is the next step that we need to figure out? The next thing that would be helpful to understand. And the problem there would be, the problem to be addressed, is that the efficacy of spacesuits to protect against COVID-19 novel virus is not yet understood. So it's sort of saying there's a lack of research, but it's sort of saying we need to understand whether this protective mechanism might work. And this article might have lots of implications for future research. Spacesuit, let's say gloves, shoes, all these things that haven't been tested. And then you want to go on to the next study, which is, we're just going to make somebody up. They're studying the same sort of issues. I should have put this right down here. And it's good to make a little spreadsheet for yourself. So maybe they said spacesuit as well and shoes, but then they also mentioned long flowing clothing. And they mentioned hair ties. I don't know. And then let's call this person C, 2020. Obviously, these people wouldn't have been doing this study in 18 and 19 anyway. But they mention shoes, hair ties, facial coverings generally, hair or head coverings. And I'm going to continue here. Just stay with me. This person's going to say space suit, shoes. And the reason I say space suit is because I was reading yesterday there was an advertisement about these things that basically you can put over your body, like half of your body, and it will like cover your face, and you just wear it around. And I thought it was very much like a spacesuit, but made for like teachers who don't want to get spit on by their children, the students. Spacesuit, shoes, head coverings, gloves. And here I want to show you the process of what's going on. We have some things showing up multiple times. Gloves has shown up twice. Spacesuit apparently 3 times. Shoes twice. No, 4 times it would appear. Right? And so I should have highlighted that maybe. Let's undo all that. And so you can use some highlighting method. And gloves. Pick a different color. Shoes is the other one that I'm seeing. And then head coverings, I guess. But which one is showing up the most so far? In other words, where is there a convergence of your problem that needs to be addressed? Well, right now it's shoes. So I didn't mean to get that one. All right, so we have shoes showing up as something that needs to be addressed. And use this metaphorically of maybe they're all saying, well, the next thing to address, depending on the subject area, is obviously I'm just making up a silly sort of, but important right now, hopefully not important by the time you're viewing this video. But what is it that they're all saying? Well, we did our study, and we think the next thing that needs to be addressed is the problem of X. And X can be any of these things, right? You're going to have a different list, probably not including spacesuit. And so what is that list? And you want to sort of pay attention as you go to E, as you go to F, and I'm just saying these as placeholders for authors' names. What is it that that keeps repeating? Is it gloves again? Is it spacesuit? And once you find sort of something that shows up 15 times or even 10, you know you're onto something. Okay? Right? Let's be happy about this, right? So shoes it is, right? Shoes. So could be the thing. And so if shoes keep showing up, a minimum of 15 times is generally what I ask my students to target for. Aim for getting evidence of a problem by 15 minimum current scholars. That means peer-reviewed articles, and that means obviously scholars who are writing those articles. It can be multiple authors on the same article. But you're not going to repeat the same article. You only use each article once. And then the thing is, you don't want to go back to 2010, or right now it's 2020, and so you don't want to go back more than 5 years, because generally a lot of universities ask you to have current evidence, and generally they say by the end of your dissertation we want 85% of everything you're citing generally in chapter 2 and to support a problem. We want that to be no more than 5 years old by the end of your dissertation, by the time that you finish. This is something to keep in mind if you end up needing to take a leave of absence. There is going to be some flexibility there. You'll want to work with your chair, but you want to understand that you need to stay current. And in your lit review, that's really where the 85% currency comes in. You're going to cite some older articles that are just too important and too poignant and relevant to leave out, but that needs to only be about 15%. The other thing, especially with a problem, we want current evidence of a problem, because what if you're reading this in 2030, everything about COVID-19 in 2020, and maybe for years, I don't know, maybe everything is sort of understood by that time. The problem has been, quote, solved. These problems that were stated by authors in 2018, 19, 20 are no longer problems. They've been thoroughly studied. They are no longer unique, relevant, and warranted problems. Okay, so hopefully you're understanding that you want to make yourself a list and sort of keep up with the problems that keep showing up. And when you find a convergence of a problem, that is when you want to sort of make this statement. And you might modify this statement as you go, but you really want to start out here or even in a chapter 2, depending on what your chair allows. So here we're asked, let's say it's shoes. The problem is to be addressed is the lack of illustrated or evidentiary justification and efficacy for shoes worn as protective clothing against the novel coronavirus. Of course, you need to also make sure, does this flow from the introduction? If you didn't mention shoes or protective gear or the coronavirus in your intro, then you're going to have a mismatch, and we call that lack of alignment or an alignment issue. You want it to be almost absolutely positive from your intro what you're about to say right here. And so you're leading up to this, and then you're clearly identifying. One thing to also note, make sure that you present one clear, concise issue to be addressed rather than two or more. The problem is shoes and head coverings. No. For a dissertation, we want it to be, we want you to be proud of it, first of all. We want it to be complex enough as to show scholarly rigor and the fact that you are able to do a complex study, but it doesn't need to be overly complex. In fact, by addressing too many problems, you may not do a very good job of addressing a singular problem. And we want you to really focus on one main thing. You can focus on the rest of the things in future research after you've got that PhD or EDD or whatever it is in hand. But until then, work on a singular problem. Just the shoes, just the head covering, whatever it is, just that one thing. Some people make the mistake of adding byproduct problems. Like the problem is that people have poor eating behaviors and they suffer from serious health issues. Okay, identify the root problem only, rather than include all the subsequent and or related problems. In terms of sentence structure, be wary of more than a single phrase. That's another way you can sort of address that singularity issue. Be cautious about including more than a single phrase with more than a single noun and a single verb. An "and" in your problem sentence may signal to you that you've identified a singular problem that you haven't identified a singular problem, or you wouldn't need to use the word "and." Or it could mean that you just haven't written your problem concisely. I once used an example with a student, and they were searching for that problem, looking in the research. And it's sort of think of a close lens versus a wide lens. You don't want it to be so wide as you can't deal with it in a research study. And you don't want it to be so tiny that there's really not enough evidence for this. And so I think of like a house in need of repair. Well, you might say the stairs are cracked. Okay, and you might find one author that suggests the fire, quote, fire is the problem, is that the stairs are cracked and in need of repair. Okay, there might just be one or two people that talk about that in your topic area. And if you widen your lens to include the rest of the house or the front of the house, let's look at the front of the house. Well, the windows are cracked and dirty. I don't know houses or anything about them really, about actually repairing houses. But the point is, you can focus on all the issues with the front of the house. And if not, you might focus on the whole house. You might include the roof. And then you can have a statement of saying, well, the house is in need of repair. That's the problem. The house is broken down. It has issues that need to be repaired. But going for the whole neighborhood, this whole area is just a sort of a broken down area in need of repair. Are you going to focus on repairing all the houses at once? Not for your dissertation. So you don't want to go that wide in your problem statement. You want to keep sort of the proper amount of focus to where you have 15 or more articles, current, peer-reviewed, that are supporting the problem that you're deciding upon, but you don't want to just have a crazy amount of problems. You also want it to be useful. If it's been studied, it's probably not useful. It says replication studies are generally a no-go. We don't typically allow them. And we want you to do unique, new research. And so what you want to do is to get that right amount of focus to where you're not trying to deal with solving world peace, but you're also not trying to solve why the person this morning on the road was driving too slow. That individual person. That's too myopic. The other is too vague and granular. Let's focus the right amount to where you have sufficient evidence, but to where the problem is still something you can handle with a research topic. One thing that's not really noted, a lot of people skip this sentence, and I suggest one clear sentence. Use the word impact. So here you're using logic rather than citations to say who is impacted. You might have some citations to say, well, when there's job dissatisfaction among females in the workforce, then that affects the whole family, it affects the community, it affects the corporation. And you do want to think about that. You may have evidence for some of it, but some of it's just using rational logic to say, well, if a female is coming home to a family and she is not happy at work, then she may bring that home. It will affect the rest of the family. She may bring that to community events. It will affect the community. She may not work as hard, or she may have work issues, and that will affect the corporation. And so you want to sort of say, what are the ripple effects of this problem? Who does it ripple, so to speak? Who does it impact most directly? And then who might be collateral damage? Or what might be collateral damage? And you might not have evidence for all this. You're asked to sort of just be thoughtful. And you don't want to go on and on. You want to have about one, maybe two sentences to discuss this. But you do want to use a sentence, and you want to signal that you're accomplishing this criterion by using some derivation of the word impact. The problem is impacting individuals that are at risk of COVID-19 infection. Here, just something to sort of check on before you move forward. Ensure the concepts presented are exactly the same as those mentioned in the purpose. This is actually something you can't do without moving forward. So you're going to come back. This should really be in the purpose statement. Make sure that the purpose matches this, and then, of course, make sure that the problem matches this. If they don't match, there's a misalignment, again, that thing where you feel like you're switching topics. So the purpose should be a direct response, and we'll get to that, to the problem. And if it seems like you're trailing off, like, you know what, I'm tired. The purpose of my study will be to understand how Mountain Dew can keep people awake. Okay, I get how you related the two, but it's not a clear, consistent, congruent flow from one to the next. The problem is A, therefore we need B. There's a fire, therefore we need to put it out. The response to the problem needs to be very obviously tied to what the problem is. I do not suggest that you worry about the word limit so much. Just sort of use, this will be 1 to 2. well, one sentence may be one, in other words, sort of sentence, qualifying sentence, or disclaiming. And then this is going to be 10 to, it's going to be 15 to 30 sentences. And a lot of what you can do sometimes is say that Goodin, well, shoes, while worn by most Americans, are not understood as they relate to PPE. And so you want to focus on that convergence that you were having on your spreadsheet. So here we might have Goodin et al. 2018, and we'd also put the other people. That way we don't have to create two different sentences. Sorry, the other. So let's use those for example. And then you might say D, which I didn't make a name, D 2020 suggested that shoes may have invaluable PPE quality, but that their efficacy is not yet tested or has not been tested. And so in this way, you're gonna, even if you have 15, 20 different citations, you can sort of start to combine them where they're basically saying the same thing. If D says something a little bit different that is important and sort of useful, worthy of sharing to really prop up your problem as justified, relevant, warranted, then go ahead and include a little bit more specifically what D said that was a little bit different than maybe what Goodin and Baden said. Then you're going to have your sentence about impact, and then this really requires no sentences, and then you're going to look at how many words you have, and you're going to start trimming. You're going to start realizing, hey, I may need to combine this with what D said. So we'll end up putting D here. Obviously, heads up on this, these should be in alphabetical order by the first letter of the last name of the first author, right? So Goodin would go last per APA format currently. And so you want to look back and start trimming after you've got everything in place. And trimming may not be actually taking things out, but converging sentences and what different authors said. And it's just sort of the art of writing in a scholarly way, but also combining things, saying things more concisely. Work with your chair for that. Once you've done the hard work, the chair is willing typically to help you work on that artistic flow of scholarly writing, how to write concisely but meaningfully. But wait, before I close the video, I want to point out something on this criterion where there's actually 3 different things. I only touched on one. I want to make sure that I emphasize that you need to go beyond impacting. After that, sentence or sentences, 1 to 2 sentences. Go into what is not known that should be known about the problem. Now, based on your already sort of maybe 30 research articles that you've read, you should have gotten an idea. Go back to my example of shoes versus head coverings versus spacesuits. What is not known? Those 3 things are not known, but the one you're going to concentrate on for your study is going to be the shoes, hypothetically. So you want to have a sentence or two about what is not known, and maybe even say the focus of the current study will be on the issue of not knowing about shoes as PPE. And then you want, so 1 to 2 sentences on that, and then 1 to 2 sentences on what the potential negative consequences could be if the problem is not addressed in this study. So if you don't do this study, what is the world going to fall apart? What will happen? Will people remain in ignorance? Will people not be getting the help that they could be getting? Will the moon turn to blood? What will happen if the problem is cancer exists and we need to cure it? Then the negative consequences of not doing the study could be that people will continue to die from cancer. So what is it for your study? That wraps us up for this long video. I appreciate your patience. Hope you come back to hear more about the purpose and the rest of the dissertation. Thank you.